Hello, my lovely. In this deeply moving episode of the Mother Gaia Birthday Pod, I sit down with Aaisha Alvi, author of A Mum Like That, a Memoir of Postpartum Psychosis. Aaisha shares her raw and powerful story of struggling with postpartum psychosis, the challenges she faced in getting help, and how she turned her experience into a book that is both personal and incredibly informative. We also dive into my own struggles with postpartum psychosis and the devastating reality that many women, especially women of colour and racialised women, face even greater barriers to care, support and understanding. This is a conversation that needs to be heard, shedding light on the hidden struggles of postpartum mental health and the urgent need for better awareness and support. This episode is for anyone who has been through the darkness of postpartum mental illness, anyone supporting a loved one through it, and for those who want to understand the realities that so many women endure. So, let's sit, get a cuppa, and listen to what Aaisha has to say.
I want to start by just thanking you, Katie, for having me on this podcast. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you for coming on, really. I've just literally finished actually listening to the book. And it's the first time I've had someone on who I feel like I know a lot about you without ever having met you.
Oh. Yeah, I can understand. Yeah. You took a deep dive into like a personal, horrible experience of my life. So I can understand that.
Yeah. It's obviously the book itself is really quite powerful. And you've obviously put a lot of time and a lot of effort, and you'll have had to have put a lot of confidence into yourself to be able to go, right, here's my most vulnerable part of my life. Let's send it out into the ether for everybody. Like, that must have been really hard to do.
Yeah. And I kind of did it because I really want to create awareness and make sure that what happened to me and what happened to me with healthcare providers and stuff doesn't happen to anyone else. And that was kind of my motivation. It didn't have anything to kind of do with bravery or courage or anything. It was just like wanting to prevent what happened to me from happening to anyone else.
Yeah, I can absolutely understand that. It's kind of why I do what I do as well, but for slightly different reasons.
Right.
So, shall we start sort of like at the beginning? Obviously the book does touch on it's quite difficult for me to kind of go into as well, because there was a lot of things that I had to personally battle with, a few of my own demons, particularly at the very start of the book. One of the things that got me, I actually had to turn it off because I was driving the car, and one of my things that I always had, even before I had children, was feeling like being out of control and like I was going mad and there was something wrong, and being strapped down so that I didn't have any will of my own. And obviously at the very beginning of the book, when you're talking about, was it your mum's friend or someone that she knew who you went to go and help, saying that when the paramedics got there, they had a spinal board to strap her down. And I had to instantly turn the book off at that point, because I thought, I'm going to have to be in a better position and not be driving my car for me to actually go through this myself. So I can only kind of imagine that the book itself has taken you quite a long time to go through, because this is your lived experience.
Yeah, but actually, it's quite the opposite, because what happened is, and of course I've talked about this in other interviews, I actually wrote the book in 3 months flat.
Wow.
3 months after recovering and helping the women that I did, I went to my doctor because I was after I helped the woman, I was trying to do more research about postpartum psychosis and read about other people's stories about who had gone through it. Because after going through it, and seeing how similar the woman Nadia, who I helped, how her experience was very similar, I was like, there has to be more people out there that experienced it at the level that I did, and the first woman that I meet had a very similar experience. So I tried to find more written like accounts of it. And I couldn't find anything because this was back in 2006, 2007. So I went to my doctor and I was like, why are there no books on this condition, like first person accounts of this? And I was whining and complaining about that. And my doctor kind of offhandedly, she said, well, why don't you write one? And I took that and I kind of just was like, okay, I will write one. And so 3 months after I recovered, I started writing it. And I was done in like 3 months writing the entire book because, I mean, of course, it looked very different from what's out there now. There was 15 drafts in between,
Yeah.
but I wrote everything that had happened to me down right then as it was very fresh in my mind. So it was very easy for me to capture everything. Of course, again, like I said, it didn't sound like a story. It was more like, this is what happened to me. That's what happened to me type of thing. And then I had to kind of learn the craft of writing it as a story. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I got it down really quick. And that's why everything was like very fresh in my mind.
Wow. I mean, you've said there that obviously that when you read the book, it does read like a story. I mean, a scary story, I'll give you that, but it doesn't read like, oh, this happened to me, that happened to me, blah 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 blah. It is very kind of, you are submerged into this book, into the storytelling.
Mhm.
So is that like a craft you've learned how to do? Is that something that's helped you sort of recover, or did you have someone help you do
Oh
that?
no. Yeah, so what happened is that after I wrote my first draft, I tried to send it off to publishers. And of course, it wasn't written that well. It was written more like, this happened to me, that happened to me type of thing.
Yeah.
So I did back then have publishers that were interested. They were kind of like, we'd be interested if you could craft this more like a narrative. But we did want to tell you that it's very violent. And because you have to remember, this was like back in 2007, and they were like, this upends everything that we know about motherhood, and we need you to take some of the graphic violence out. Although I have to be honest, nothing is gratuitous violence in there. It's actually, what happens in the thinking process, what might happen in the thinking process of someone with this condition. So I was like, no, I will absolutely not take out that stuff because this is true to what happens to women with this illness. So I kind of, shoved my book aside for a while because there was no way I wanted to take out, I wanted to the public to know what happens with this illness. So I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But instead, I started reading a lot more just memoirs in general. And in between 2007 and like 2020, memoirs about postpartum psychosis did come out. So I got to read, I've read all the accounts of postpartum psychosis, I think minus one that people wrote. And so then, and they were all great and I love them all. But I still noticed that none of them touched on like kind of like the homicidal thoughts and urges that can come with this illness and stuff. So I still felt like there was a place for my book out there. And in the process of reading a lot of good writing and redrafting and redrafting my work, I kind of picked up I would read a memoir or read a book and be like, okay, this is how to write dialogue. Okay, this is how you make somebody feel like show, not tell type of thing. So it took me quite a long time to learn that. I learned it on my own, but it took me quite a while to learn it. That's why when people always contact me and are like, oh, I want to write a book, I just let them know that I got 110 rejections. And, it took 15 drafts. So it's a lot of work if that's something that you want to
Yeah.
do, but it's well worth it if you feel like you have a message that's not out there and you'd like to share something that you feel like could help other people.
Yeah. I mean, and with that as well, like obviously it is, like you said, it is more written like a narrative, like a story, so you can kind of get into it. But within that, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of research. There's a lot of sort of statistics, but you don't feel like you're being preached to. It's part of the story. But how did you find all of that research? Is this something that you've gone looking for, or is it something that has come across because of your experiences?
Yeah, it's just like I'm always like a research kind of brain type of person, and I always like to find out more about you know things, especially because this was something that I went through. And the thing is that with this condition, it's very, as you saw with my book, the other woman that I helped that had it, I don't normally ever believe in things like demonic possession and things like that. But when I was sick, I did believe that I was, possibly possessed. Or not possibly. I did think that the devil was speaking to me. And I'm even saying like possibly because I don't even want to acknowledge that I thought that. But that is the reality. When I was sick, I did think that. And that's what. So when I came out of it, even though my psychiatrist kept telling me this was an illness, that's why the medication worked. It was really hard for me to process that because it just felt like, no, I'm a bad person. That's what it just felt like to me. And then when I met Nadia and saw basically the same thing happening in her, and that's why the statement that she said, like, am I a good person, was so, oh my God, it just like struck me like lightning in the heart, because I was like, I know what she's thinking. And that's what kind of really finally got the words that my psychiatrist kept telling me, that this is an actual scientific biological illness. That's when it really hit me. And after, at that point, I was like, I want to learn all I can about this condition, and not just from my psychiatrist. I want to read what all the literature, what all the everything says about it. So that's kind of what propelled me into that. I know there's some people that kind of feel like after they experience this, they don't want to know anything about it. They can't read anybody's accounts or anything. And I respect that, because you have to do what's good for you. But I'm the type of person that really needs to be able to understand what I've been through to be able to process it. And so in doing that, I got all this information, and it kind of ended up being things that I felt like people needed to know to be able to understand and process what I was going through with me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, there's some of the things that hit home for me as well. And some of the things that you can come across as, and sorry, I'm struggling for my words today. Just bear with me. You might have noticed me stumbling over my words just now, and I want to be honest about why. I've always tried to be open, whether in my blogs, my podcast, in any of the work that I do, because I know that by sharing, I can help others feel less alone. But I also wrestle with how much to share, and with that fear of judgment, of people seeing me differently, not just as me, but as a mother. Right now, I'm going to sit with that discomfort. I was going to cut this next bit out of the podcast because this is something that I've never spoken about publicly before, and I still don't even go into great detail. But I feel it's important, not just for me, but for anybody out there who needs to hear it. So I'm taking a deep breath and I'm going to share. About, you said about demons and demonic things. And I mean, I think I chatted with you before we actually had this conversation that I'd kind of not particularly suffered greatly, but I've had a little bit of an insight to it when I had my first child.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd heard voices and
Mm-hmm.
seen like shadows and things up and down the walls. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, for me, thankfully, eventually I did get the right kind of treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And mine was brought on more by severe exhaustion.
Right.
So once we got that kind of under control and what have you, it all stopped. But
Mm-hmm.
I can remember one night just thinking, I just need to go to sleep, and the baby won't stop crying. And all I need to do is, if I punch him clean in the face,
Mm-hmm.
I'll knock him out and he'll be asleep, and then I can get some sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this other part of me going, you don't want to do that though. And it was almost like this little battle.
Mm-hmm.
And like you were saying, like as you got further and further into the book, it's this battle between God and the devil,
Right.
trying to do this thing, and you just don't know what to do with yourself.
Right. Yes, because you're like kind of hearing or thinking both sides of it, and you're like, wait, which one should I go with?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's very much that old thing of having an angel on one side and a devil on the other side, of like trying to
Right.
tug you in two different directions.
Yeah.
Um,
And when you don't identify with either of the thoughts that you're kind of getting, then, like, for me, why I believe I kind of attributed to demon possession was because I was hearing these voices that were saying things, and I was like, I don't believe any of that stuff, and I don't identify with that. So who could it be? And
Yeah.
so you naturally kind of want to attribute it to something aside from your own thoughts or your own thinking. So I think that that's where it comes from. So like, it's like, that's why somebody and I mentioned in the book that even people who are atheist and agnostic, and people that have, no religion whatsoever, believe in religious delusions at that time, because it's like trying to make sense of what is happening and what is going on. It seems so otherworldly, not part of anything that you've experienced, in a normal, like in your part of your baseline,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's my hypothesis for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and just a little sort of like carry on from that. Um, when I then said to someone about, well, I've had these thoughts, I've had these feelings, etc., it was just met with, oh, you just baby blues. It's fine. You just need to
Mhm.
get some sleep.
Right.
And it was just kind of poo-pooed away.
Hmm.
Obviously, mine wasn't quite as severe as yourself, but how many times were you turned away for help? Was it 4 or 5 in the space of 2 weeks?
5 times, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how was that for you to have to? Because it's hard enough admitting that this sort of stuff is happening
Yeah.
because of the stigma around it, but having to keep going back.
Yeah, because I was just so terrified. I didn't know what to do, because I wanted it to stop, and it was, and that's what made my experience that much more horrific. The fact
Mhm.
that I had some level of insight that this was not right, and just like not being able to pass any of the gatekeepers to getting help. And that's what motivated me and kept me motivated, even though it took years from after writing it to actually get it published. It just kept motivating me, because I do read about lots of these cases where there are tragic outcomes to women's cases, and they have tried to get help, right?
Yeah,
They have gone, and so I'm like, okay, like this is continuing to happen. This is still a problem, that too many healthcare providers are, like you said, poo-pooing women who come in with concerning symptoms. And so that's why I felt like, like it just kept motivating me to, like, no, this needs to be out there, so that anybody that is interested in this topic can read about what actually does happen to women.
yeah, absolutely. And I
Mhm.
mean, as a general rule, I do find that just being a woman, you seem to have to fight that little bit extra, especially for things like medical attention and things like that as well. But one thing that did strike me, which I do know I have heard of, but obviously if you're a woman of colour, it's
Mhm.
even harder.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so did you think that that was part of how you were struggling to get help as well? Because of you
Yes.
being of a racial background and things like that.
Yeah, and initially I did not make the connection, because after I got better and met Nadia and saw that she was kind of like dismissed too, at least once, by her healthcare provider, I didn't make the connection that it had anything to do with race initially. But and I kind of, because everybody always thinks that their experience is the norm, right? So
Yeah,
I kind of assumed that, like, maybe everybody that has postpartum psychosis has such a terrible time getting help. But then as I started reading, like, even like brief little accounts online that I could come across of, I was like, wait a second, all of these women are getting help within like 24 hours, 48 hours, 1 week of displaying symptoms, and they actually went into the doctor saying far less than I said, and they're all able to get help. And then I started noticing that the real difference was that I happened to be a woman of color. So then I started exploring that further in research, and that's when I came across, oh my goodness, so much research, a lot of which that I cite. And it was just like, racialized women aren't screened, don't get follow-up care, get misdiagnosed more, and all of this kind of stats kind of started rolling out at me. And then in the volunteer work that I started doing, I also started noticing that more often than not, and I'm not trying to say that this doesn't happen to white women, it definitely does, but more often than not, the person that was having trouble getting help happened to be racialized, a woman of color. So that also like anecdotally showed me that what my personal experience, what the research was all like lining up. And then there was another thing that happened that I actually went back to my psychiatrist. Like I not went back, like I stayed with my psychiatrist for like a year and a half and stuff like that. And at one of the appointments, after I was a lot better and after I had written my first draft of my book, I said to her, why do you think that none of the doctors helped me? And I point blank asked her that. And she said something which I was like so bizarre. She said to me, I think they thought you were malingering. And I was like, why would they think I was faking? It's not like I had killed anybody. It's not like, why would, like, I was like so startled that she said that. And I was like, what? Why would they think that? And she said, I really do think that that's why they didn't help you, because you told them you were hearing voices. You told them that you felt like harming people but didn't want to. And those are all key things that if we hear, we should be hospitalizing somebody. So I really think that they thought that you were malingering. And then in doing the research, I saw that there is studies that document the fact that healthcare providers have harbored a lot of these implicit biases towards women of color. And one of the ones that they harbor towards South Asian women is the fact that they think of them as attention seeking and exaggerating what they're going through. They have different little stereotypes of different communities, but the one, that kind of makes sense with what my doctor was saying. If you are perceiving, if there's a general perception that South Asian women want attention and will exaggerate the extent of their symptoms, then it makes sense that doctors might look at what you're saying as signs of malingering. And I personally don't think it was just that. It was just that. I think that it was also the fact that a lot of these providers were completely ignorant of the fact that postpartum psychosis existed. But even if they were ignorant, like if they didn't think that, I was attention seeking or malingering, maybe they would have, pushed me to a specialist to figure out what was going on. But so I think it was a combination of both of those. Like there was so much ignorance that they couldn't, that even when I was saying I'm hearing voices, they didn't connect that there's a condition called postpartum psychosis that this could be indicative of. So I think that those are two issues, and that's why I kind of run them parallel in my book. Like the fact that there's so much ignorance about this, and then the fact that racialized women do have a harder time getting help for any kind of, not just postpartum psychosis or postpartum mood disorders. So I
Yeah,
think they kind of intersected there.
yeah, absolutely. Um, I just wanted to kind of touch back on some of the things that you sort of drew strength on during that time. So you did a lot of reading and writing passages. I've written down the Quran, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, do you think that kind of relationship that you had with God and with your religion and things like that actually helped you and gave you the strength to come through it? Um,
Um, yes, I did. I did feel like just feeling like there was like something out there in the world that I could turn to. I think what is was powerful for me. And I think it's even for people that don't believe in religion. When I do help people, I always tell them, like if you have any type of spiritual or anything, like shout it out into the universe. Like if you think that saying something into the universe can help you, because I think it is powerful to believe that there's something that has control over these matters. Because I certainly wasn't getting help from the doctors initially. Like I can imagine that I might have been, I mean, I was suicidal, but I can imagine that maybe I might have been even more suicidal had I felt like there was nobody in the world that I could turn to.
yeah,
So just feeling like maybe if I said something, to be it to God, to the universe or whatever, like help me, like that somebody would hear me and help and listen to my plea.
yeah, absolutely. Um, and your partner, during the book,
Hmm.
obviously there was lots of things going on. I mean, I know it's obviously a point of view from what you saw and what happened.
Hmm.
Um, Oh, I mean, obviously you'll have talked and things since then, and all the rest of it. So, like, how does he kind of look back on that time, and what was his sort of experience of it?
Yeah, it was like like initially I had so much anger toward him, like so much, like I cannot even tell you
Yeah,
how much anger I had towards him and even the rest of my family. Like it took about like I would say a year and a half of therapy to really, like, I mean, helping Nadia made me see how difficult it is to support someone with a severe mental health condition, and it gave me some kind of insight to have some of the ice on my heart melt. But it really took a year of therapy for me to actually like really seriously resolve all these issues, because it really hurt me, some of the things that were said, and the way I was treated. But the more the more I was working with my book, obviously the first draft of my book just had entirely my perceptions in it, like, this person was like,
yeah,
everybody was like so vicious and mean, right? But
yeah,
then over the drafts, as I went to therapy and stuff, and I started to process things and read things, and see how much ignorance exists about this condition, even like amongst providers and things like that, that really helped me to understand like the feelings of my family members, especially my husband, because he always knew from day one that something was not right. And he was going with me, trying to get help and everything like that. And I just couldn't imagine how it must have felt to be him, to know that something is wrong with your loved one, but and the people that have the gateway to getting you that help keep shutting the door down. So just, and then also in helping people and talking to families of loved ones impacted by this illness, and kind of hearing first person from them, like them banging their heads on a door and being like, experiencing some of the same frustrations that my husband felt, gave me more and more insight and empathy into how my family experienced this illness as well. It wasn't something, like, what I now understand is not something that afflicted me alone. It afflicted my entire family. Like,
mhm,
to be honest, like after I know it sounds kind of bizarre, but after my second experience, after a few years, I did want another baby. And my doctor was like, well, we can prophylactically treat you, and I would highly recommend that you be inpatient hospitalized while we treat you, so that, because you've had it twice and the second time was like really intense. So I was actually kind of like bandying about with that idea. And when I suggested it to my family, everybody in my family was like, absolutely no way. No bloomin' way that's happening. And my husband was like, unless you're gonna be like Virgin Mary and immaculately conceived, that ain't happening. And my mother was literally like, tell me, give me the word, I'm packing my bags and moving to India. Like everybody was like so unbelievably traumatized by my experience, that it kind of was like eye-opening to me.
yeah.
Like, they were like, oh my god, no way, like my worst experience was also the worst experience of their lives.
Our
Like,
lives, yeah.
yeah. So I don't have any more children because
Fair enough.
I don't, yeah.
Um, so you said you like volunteering. Your whole mission is to kind of like help other people in similar sort of situations and what have you. So what is it that you're up to with that?
So with that, I've been doing a lot of like I mentioned in the book, about a year after I recovered, my psychiatrist was like, you know what, like helping that woman really, seem to have helped you recover further. And I think you'd be really good to be involved in medical education. So I was, would go in and present to like residents and stuff like that about my experience, to kind of give them insight into how to interview somebody with postpartum mental health issues and stuff like that. And thereafter, I started volunteering with an organization called Postpartum Support International. So I do a lot of medical education stuff, and I'm a volunteer with Postpartum Support International, and I have my own Instagram, which is how I connected with you, through my Instagram handle, where I spread awareness. I write articles. So this is all the kind of stuff that I've been involved in, and just my mission. Like, what gives me the most joy is to be able to spread awareness, to get those messages from doctors or whatever that said, oh, because I read your book, I felt like I was able to identify a woman that was not, fully divulging her symptoms, and we have her safe at the hospital. Like, that just completely melts my heart to hear that, because even if one person is benefits from it, like that is like, I think I quoted it in my book because it was part of my delusion at the time. But there's my favorite verse of scripture is that if you save one life, it's akin to as though you've saved all of humanity. And if you take a single life, it's as kin, it'll be recorded as akin to taking the lives of all of humanity. So for me, just my book and my experience, even helping one person, like, to me, that feels like, oh, it's like, even that one person's life is akin to all of humanity. So that's what I try to involve myself in, just spreading awareness and through those different formats.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And like you said, it's absolutely an issue that it doesn't get talked about enough. It is sensitive, and I do get that, and it can get quite dark. But then, if we're not talking about the dark side of it, if we're not telling other people about the struggles that we can go through, about things that can happen, how are you supposed to prepare for it or support it if you know nothing about it?
Exactly.
Um, yeah, so I think the fact that you've brought this book out so that people can read it and do what I do, I had to read it in bits, but still read it and got the right information and things like that. So it's definitely a brilliant thing to have done.
Yeah.
Um, so the book, just remind us what the book is called
Yeah, it's called A Mom Like That, a memoir of postpartum psychosis. And yeah.
and where can we find it? I know I
Yeah.
got it in Audible.
Yeah, it's pretty much available everywhere. A lot of book retailers all over the world are selling it, and Amazon is probably the easiest source for it. But even like independent book retailers and stuff are carrying it, and it's available in various formats, including Audible, ebook. So whatever's your jam, you can digest it that way, type of thing.
And just to round us all off, if you can just tell us what your Instagram handle is so that if anybody needs any help or needs to reach out or needs any information, they can find you there.
Yeah, so my Instagram handle is at Aaisha, which is Aisha Alvi Writes, Writes, and it's all one word, no spaces, nothing. And I also have a website that's Aisha, in the same name, AishaAlvi.com, where I share articles and stuff and all the interviews. So I'll be once this comes out, I'll be sharing it on my website as well. Yeah, so and I'm happy to connect with anybody that's like concerned about, their family members or themselves. And yeah, I'm happy to do whatever it is that I can to help support, you know, somebody that's experiencing something like this or concerned. And I wanted to add, like you were sharing about your story. I am so sorry that you went through that, and you also faced that kind of dismissal. I'm so sorry, and I'm so happy you made it out onto the other side, and you're here creating awareness. That is phenomenal.
Oh, thank you very much. Like I always say, if you don't know about the dark side, I'm very open about all of my experiences, with lots of different things that have happened throughout my podcast and my blogs and things. So yeah, I'd rather tell people and
Right.
then keep it safe and in my own head so that no one else can help. Very much like you, if I can save one
Yeah.
person, I'll be happy.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And then, like, if more people did that, then, and I respect those that don't, because that don't want to, like, it's either way. But if people didn't feel like these things had to be a secret, like the initial title for my book was supposed to be The Secret We Keep, because there are things that we keep as a secret, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe, yeah, but maybe like sharing some of it can help, another person. And I think that if you've been a person that's gone through a struggle, like, the last thing that you want is for somebody else to go through that same struggle.
Yeah.
So yeah, kudos to you um, for doing that. And did you have any other questions for me?
Um, I think you've gone through a lot of the questions that I had. Was there anything that you wanted to kind of add, any sort of like last little notes or anything?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing that I want people to understand about postpartum psychosis is that it's a serious mental health condition that can afflict women after giving birth, pregnancy termination, miscarriage, any of those situations. It is temporary and treatable. So there is no reason to be afraid of sharing anything that's happening with you. There is help out there. The only reason this illness is a danger is because people are shamed, or healthcare providers and stuff are ignorant about it. But there is no reason. So please just reach out for help. There is help, and nobody needs to suffer from this illness.
I just want to take a moment to thank Aaisha for sharing her story with such honesty and depth. A Mum Like That is such an important book, and I truly appreciate the work she's doing to raise awareness about postpartum psychosis. And to you, my lovely listeners, thank you for being here, for listening with kindness, and for holding space for these conversations. It means so much to have a community where we can talk about the hard stuff without fear or shame. If this episode has resonated with you, please know that you are not alone and there is support out there. You can find all the links to connect with Aaisha and access resources in the show notes. As always, if you found this episode helpful, please share it, leave a review and reach out. I love hearing from you. And until next time, many blessings.